So welcome everybody. Very happy to talk today about generalist robot policies. This is a topic where I have also myself done a bit of research over the last years. So very excited to share some insights here and also hopefully some lessons that we've learned along the way that might be useful for you now that you're training yourselves, like VLAs and so forth, for your group projects. So if you remember, we already have covered some very impactful work in robot learning from the last few years, like ACT or diffusion policies that really excel at doing this like dexterous tasks and learning handling like multimodal behaviors really well. You can see like the demos are really, really impressive, very dexterous, high frequency control. However, these methods, as we have seen in the past, they are really well suited to fit like single task policies. So it's kind of like more specialist models. And are a little bit harder to kind of scale to train more generalist multi-embodiment robot policies. Like typically here, you would need to retrain like your policy often for like new robot embodiments or new tasks and so forth. And so what's the goal? Like the North Star of the robot learning community is really to build generalist robot policies that can control many robots with a single model in many environments and perform also many tasks while working with and alongside humans, right? And so this is kind of our quest towards, let's say, the Holy Grail in robot learning. And it comes with many questions, such as where do we get the data from to train these models, or how can we model like very large-scale, very heterogeneous data distributions? How can we generalize these policies to unstructured environments in the real world and so forth, right? And so our goal is really to enable kind of this future where in which you can download your favorite robot brain online, and then out of the box, your robot should start showing reasonable or ideally intelligent behavior in a useful manner for your particular robot, right? Of course, this is very much inspired from advances that we've seen in the NLP and computer vision communities that we already have kind of covered in the lecture. As you know, the kind of like canonical workflow to develop these models, these foundation models in NLP, are that they train on like a large diverse data set containing not just a single task, but many, many different tasks, right? So it could be like code completion, language translation, question answering, and so forth. And then we have seen that typically these models outperform the behavior of kind of more single, like specialist models that are like more tailored towards doing one specific task, right? And this is, let's say, this paradigm shift that we have seen where large models trained on diverse data sets will typically surpass more specialist models that we maybe like in the past years were developing for different tasks like object detection, language translation, image captioning, and so forth, right? And so these are these foundation models like VLMs nowadays. And in robot learning, our goal is to kind of we would like to see the same benefits and behaviors for robotics too, right? So let's talk about what are some of the key ingredients that we need in order to develop such generalist robot policies, and what are some of the key differences and challenges in applying the same recipes that have worked in NLP and vision to robotics. So to start with, kind of the first obvious thing that you'll notice is that in robotics, we don't have the luxury of like really large-scale robot data sets that are comparable in size to the ones that you will find in NLP and vision that are used for frontier modeling nowadays. Because robot data is scarce and expensive, and now that you probably have started collecting your first teleop demos with your SO101, like you can imagine like how hard it is to collect these demonstrations to reach the same magnitude of like a frontier model. And so additionally, there is also a difference in that in terms of how to model this data, right? So robot data is very multimodal and very heterogeneous, right? So instead of just training on natural language or even just like language and vision, we have like multiple sensing modalities with robots that we need for the robots to be able to interact with the real world, because interacting in the real world, as you know, is like a multi-sensory experience, right? So basically each robot embodiment has different observation and action spaces. So it's really very heterogeneous. Additionally, we also typically want to do real-time control with our robots. So we don't want to send a query to ChatGPT and like wait a minute for its API to return a response that tells us how the next action for our robot should be, right? And finally, we also, as we scale the capabilities of our generalist robot policies, that can now not only do like a single task, but many tasks, maybe even with many different environments, you can think that the cost for evaluating these models like increases like dramatically, right? So we need also ways of doing like more scalable evaluations or better ways of doing evaluations. And so we'll talk a little bit about these three ingredients in today's lecture. So let's start with the data. Where do we get this from? Because as you know, like no matter what the embodiment is, like it's really expensive to teleoperate a robot, for each and every new task that you want to teach your model. I can talk from experience here. Here on the left, you can see how I'm like teleoperating to collect some data with the Franken robot in the setup I did for my PhD. And so it's really costly to collect data. And so the key idea that enabled the first versions of generalist robot policies was to leverage existing sources of data. In general, there had been some previous efforts in the community to collect like some data sets, but usually not in a way that enabled co-training between them. And so kind of the key idea here is that in general, like no matter like what your research is about, every robotic labs in the world collects some sort of data, right? Like maybe like your lab focuses on, I don't know, like touch sensing, and you collect like some teleop data with like tactile sensors or something. And it's usually like very small scale data to support like your research and your papers. And that's why often like we don't think of putting it online, or we think it might not be interesting for others, right? But in essence, there is a lot of existing robot data in the world. And so when I was wrapping up my PhD, I was able to collaborate with Google on this project called the OpenX embodiment data set, where we essentially went and asked all our friends in different labs around the world if they had any available robot data. And then we aggregated all of that, put it into a common format that allowed co-training on it. That's basically what we did. And we ended up with over 1 million of real robot episodes, which was substantially more than any previous like robot dataset effort up to that point. And this was not just like a single robot embodiment, but many different, like over 20 different robot embodiments. And as you can see, like really like a lot of labs around the world participated in this effort. And regarding the results of this project, this was really the first time where we saw sparks that is of a single model trained on all these multiple robot data sets, surpassing the best previous method that was tailored for a particular setup. And so here, these are kind of the main results, and you can see I, for example, contributed continuous evaluations during the model development with the robot setup that I built during my PhD in Germany, which you can see on the top. And so this paper has been quite impactful because it allowed now algorithmic progress on the modeling side of generalist robot policies by making it possible to train on over 1 million of diverse cross-embodied robot trajectories for the first time. And many of the works I will present today, or I will build up upon this data set, or will use this data set as their foundation. Okay. So I have talked about where we can, for example, get the data to train generalist robot policies. And now the second question is, how can we model this data? Right? What can we do with this data? Because, of course, this is easier said than done, right? As I already mentioned a few slides ago, in general, like robots are very, very heterogeneous. They have different task specifications, different types of sensors, different numbers of cameras, like maybe one robot has a single camera, another has like 3 or 4, very different action spaces, and figuring out how to share information and knowledge across robots and that looks so different makes this a very challenging problem. So let's start with a basic example. When we typically train a robot policy, as you already have seen in the exercises, the model will take as an input a current observation, an image, and a task description, nowadays often in natural language, right? And then the model will predict like a sequence of end effector poses, let's say, to achieve the goal of this tasks, right? Now, our premise is that we want to fit like a generalist robot policy on a very large, diverse, heterogeneous data set. And now, if we squint a bit and we replace the robot image with a more regular internet image, and now we replace the instruction with, let's say, a caption of caption this scene, right? And then, you know, like the model answers like, oh, like the picture shows the Statue of the Liberty or something. This starts to look quite familiar because essentially this is like a vision and language model, right? And so the key idea that a lot of the generalist robot policy works built upon is that you can view robotics as a similar multi-model sequencing modeling problem, right? Where you're trying to learn a powerful model that maps from images and text to answers, right? But in robotics, in our case, the answers are not really text, right? But they will represent actions. And this has many benefits because because we have now language tokens, image tokens, and action tokens, we can leverage also many of the advances that have been made in NLP and vision in like general like multimodal sequence modeling. So from non-robotic domains into the robotic domain. So as a first step towards developing such generalist robot policies, we developed Octo, which was the kind of the first open source generalist policy. And this is, in a nutshell, a large transformer-based policy that was trained on 800,000 robot trajectories of the OpenX embodiment dataset I just talked about. And here, similar to the Gato paper that Scott Reed talked about last week. The main idea is that you tokenize all this diverse heterogeneous input and action outputs and train this large transformer, right? So how does it work? So Octo is a fairly straightforward transformer model. So it has a pre-trained language encoder that tokenizes your language inputs. We used a T5 model here. And then it has an observation tokenizer that patchifies your image observations and runs them through a shallow CNN to produce your image tokens. So then you concatenate both tokens, observation and task tokens, and pass them through a transformer that in essence looks very similar to a vanilla vision transformer, like a VIT. Maybe one thing to note here is that the transformer in Octo has a blockwise causal structure. So all the task tokens can attend to each other, but they can't look at the observation tokens. And the observation tokens from the first time steps can look at themselves and the tasks, but not at future time steps. All right. And then for the actions, we define these purple readout tokens, which are essentially placeholder tokens that summarize the embeddings that then go into these functional heads. One thing to note is that this model, we train it with goal-conditioned behavior cloning. So this means that it predicts a sequence of actions to reach a goal state given the current state. And as we saw also previously, this is a very flexible formulation because it allows you to specify your goal states in various ways, be it goal images or natural language instructions. All right, so we have now the task, observations, and the readout blocks. And then, because this is a sequential model, you pass this, you run this over multiple time steps. And in our case, the functional heads were diffusion decoding heads, because we found also in experiments that it really helped handle multimodal behavior much better than other ways. And I also want to talk about some key design decisions that we made in this project. First of all, we try to invest all our compute inside the transformer, as opposed to prior designs that had like these larger ResNet-style encoders for each image separately and then merge them in a late fusion style. Originally, we thought that, wow, we have like so much data, we can just train everything from scratch. And maybe in hindsight, it was not the best idea, but at the time, like, that's what we thought. And maybe some additional insights we had in this project was that although we didn't align the coordinate frames from all these different data sets, which kind of was a scalability choice, we did take care of aligning the gripper dimension of all the different data sets. This was because in the beginning, a lot of the failures were related to the gripper, like early grasping. So we kind of then made sure that the semantics for the gripper were all the same. So like 1 for opening and 0 for closing. And here in the figure, you can see like some of the different options that different data sets had applied for controlling their end effector gripper action, right? So it could be like absolute, relative, continuous, and so forth. And so that's the one thing we kind of try to align across all data sets. All right, so we divided the evaluation into zero-shot evals and fine-tuning evals. across many kind of labs and institutions. And we used the same fine-tuning recipe to adapt Octo to new sensory and action spaces. I won't go too much into the results, but in general, we found that Octo could control multiple robot embodiments out of the box, and also outperformed previous models from Google trained on similar data. So particularly like the RT1X model that was trained for the OpenX embodiment project. It outperformed this model, and it also matched the RT2X, which was a much larger 55 billion parameter closed source VLA model from Google, which was kind of like the first VLA. All right. This video shows, I think, the first successful grasp we ever saw from our Octo model on the Google robot, which we were serving via remote server.
Bam!
Oh, one success. Nice.
One success. All right, good.
Yeah. By the way, on the left, this is Kwan. This is our guest lecturer today. At the time, he was at Google. So he was helping us do this evaluations. So yeah, it's also worth, it was very cool because robot evals are always very challenging, and even more when you are not next to the robot, but you have to rely on people helping you. And one thing to note here is that actually these evals in Mountain View, they were quite out of distribution for our model because although we had trained on their data, like the data that Google had collected, that data had been collected in a different building, so they had moved buildings, which is, you know, obviously like then quite out of distribution. And so we were excited that, you know, even like, you know, simple tasks were still working. So this was our eureka moment. Okay, so these were zero-shot evaluations. But one thing I want to highlight about generalist robot policies in general is the adaptability aspect, because ideally, these models should be useful for your robot, even if the model did not pre-train on your model, right? Like it should be like a good basis for post-training it to your particular embodiment, because like it could be a new robot, or maybe for this particular task, you want to add some new sensing modalities. Maybe you need to do force torque sensing, or you want to change the number of cameras for your particular task, right? Or maybe you want to do different like action spaces. Maybe now instead of like Cartesian control, you want to do like a joint control, right? So how we did approach this in Octo is that once you have a new input, like let's say force torque readings, you can slot in this new input with a few tokens, and then you fine-tune the model. And because in this case, most of the parameters were inside the transformer itself, you get to retain most of the knowledge when fine-tuning. Yeah, I won't go into detail about the fine-tuning results, but basically what we found out when we were doing this experiments for different fine-tuning setups across different labs was that fine-tuning from a generalist robot policy or a robot foundation model, RFM, worked much better than any other like state-of-the-art visual representation learning-based backbone. So this is kind of like the key message, I think. And I think this applies also to many other current like state-of-the-art models. And we actually, I think in terms of the adoption, it got quite popular, and we actually saw, we found that people or researchers across the world actually used Octo and fine-tuned it to their embodiment. So here is like on the left, a video I found on Twitter from a researcher who fine-tuned on an unseen spot robot. And then also on the right, you can see like a Japanese company that used it to fine-tune it for their humanoid robot. All right. So far, we have talked about how you can train a generalist robot policy from scratch on a diverse data set containing a bunch of single-arm manipulation tasks, right? But ideally, like, we want to expand this to multiple embodiments, right? Because how generalist is this really, like, if all it can do is just like control like a 7 degrees of freedom arm, right? Like, ideally, it should work no matter what robot embodiment you have, right? And this is, like, I think, really important because, as you all know, this is also one of the cool things of robotics, that they are all these different embodiments, right? Tailored for different tasks, right? So we have drones that can fly around, we have quadrupeds, we have self-driving cars, humanoids, etc. So what I'm trying to say is that if we develop methods that can learn from all these different embodiments, then, like, we can scale also the data that we can consume, right? Like, there is more data than we think out there for robotics, but it's kind of like challenged because of its heterogeneity to have methods that can, like, transfer the relevant bits and knowledges across all these embodiments, right? So you can imagine, for example, that like navigation data could transfer a behavior to drones by learning how to avoid obstacles, for example, because it's kind of a common behavior, no matter if it's like a navigation robot like a Roomba, or if it's an indoor drone, for example, right? And so ideally, we would like to have a very scalable approach that can learn from any robot embodiment without any constraints, no manual like action space alignments or any kind of like constraints, right? We just want to like take our data, pass it through our transformer, and like have the model figure out like how to combine all these things. And that's kind of what we did in this paper called Crossformer, where we added more embodiments such as bimanual manipulation, navigation, or locomotion to the data mix we originally had trained Octo on, for a total of 900,000 robot trajectories, and trained a big transformer, but now with embodiment-specific heads on it. So we had like one head for like controlling single arms, one for quadrupeds, and so forth. So this model accepts variable observation inputs and predicts variable action outputs, which is quite important in order to predict action chunks of different length, because basically one of the challenges when you do this kind of extreme cross-embodiment learning is that a lot of these embodiments have vastly different control frequencies, right? So it could be from like, like a WidowX that's doing like 5 hertz control to like a bimanual dexterous manipulation robot that is doing like 50 hertz control, right? And so this means also the action chunk length that your model should predict is like vastly different. So having these different heads is like one way how you can go about this. This way also you don't have to do any action space alignment. And in order to maximize transfer across embodiments, you try to maximize parameter sharing across embodiments. So for example, by sharing image encoders weights for camera views of the same type. And here are rollouts from the Crossformer model. As you can see, like the evaluations is like very, very diverse. Many different embodiments from the quadruped in the center to like the single arm manipulation with the Francas, We also have like outdoor and indoor navigation, and yeah, also like the sushi cutting task that I already presented. We did it here too, which is this like bimanual, dexterous, super long horizon task. And so what I want to highlight here is that all rollouts that you see, all video snippets that you see, were produced by the same model. It's like a single checkpoint that's controlling all this robot embodiments, right? So it's not like we cherry picked like, oh, like this checkpoint works best for this robot, so let's do that. It's like all the same set of neural network weights. So I think that's pretty cool. And regarding quantitative results, we also found that this kind of cross-embodied policy model matched or outperformed kind of specialist policies that were tailored for specific embodiments. All right, so CrossFormer tried to answer if a generalist policy could control multiple embodiments and outperform embodiment-specific specialist policies. Now, this work from TRI, on the other hand, tried to answer the question, does multitask pre-training help post-training? This is kind of something that many in the community believe to be true, right? But in robotics, determining this is somewhat like not trivial. So I recommend reading this paper because they did a very rigorous study and by evaluating this kind of diffusion transformer policies that were trained on around 1,700 hours of pre-training data, including the OXC data sets. And then they fine-tuned it into a single bimanual tasks on their Francas across both sim and eval. And so they really went out of their way to kind of gain statistical significance here by doing blind A/B testing in the real world with the operators. So the operators would not know which policy they were scoring at the time and so forth. Right, and you can see like really impressive dexterous tasks, with cutting this apple, which is like super long horizon. I think it goes like for 2 minutes or something. Very, very impressive. And I want to highlight like a few key results here that they did. So they found out that yes, indeed, like pre-training, helps and makes post-training to single tasks up to 3 times or 5 times more sample efficient, and that this is most beneficial at low post-training data regimes. So if you don't have a lot of data to fine-tune to a new task, then this is where you reap most of these benefits. But interestingly, I think they also found that things like how you normalize your data often impacted downstream performance much more than architectural or algorithmic changes, which again shows also like why robot learning is like also like so challenging, because there are like kind of so many different knobs that one can tune to improve performance, right? And yeah, sometimes even things so simple as the normalization is really, really important. Okay, so everything we have covered so far today has been pretty much focused on training generalist robot policies from scratch on robot data. But even, as I said before, even if at the time, people thought like, oh, this is like a lot of data, like when we're doing Octo and so forth, the truth is that this still is kind of like OXC data set is minuscule compared to LLMs and VLMs that are trained on much, much more data, right? So the obvious question here to ask by many is, does internet scale priors or do internet scale priors like VLMs also transfer to downstream robotics control? And how would we go about that, right? And so the first idea to explore how to do this are similar to the lava architecture we saw a few weeks ago. If you recall here, the idea here, this was like how to add vision to an LLM, right? This is the context where we saw this when we were discussing VLMs. And here the idea was to prepend image tokens to the text so that the LLM then runs standard self-attention over this unified sequence so that image tokens and text tokens are together without any modifications like to the attention mechanism or and so forth, right? And so the key question people ask is like, well, can we treat now robot actions the same way as as Lava treats like the image tokens for adding this into the LLM, right? And that's basically how the first VLMs got fine-tuned into VLAs, right? So you have now this VLM architecture, and what you do is you tokenize your robot actions and inject these into your LLM vocabulary. And one common approach how to do this is that you can override like the less frequent tokens in your vocabulary with these new action tokens. And now your LLM can predict these new action tokens as part, because it's part of its vocabulary, and then you train this with next token prediction with the same cross-entropy loss. We already covered action tokenization in the past lectures, so I won't go into details again. But just to recap, the first approaches like RT2 or OpenVLA used a very simple, naive per dimension, per time step binning discretization approach. Okay, so this is kind of the high-level idea, but as I said before, as some of you will kind of train like, yourself VLAs for your group projects, I thought it might be good to share a few tips and tricks about how you might go about training them, right? And some questions that might arise when doing so. But I think like this, a lot of these are also general to other models that are not especially VLAs, but could also be for your world model or other sort of like large-scale robot policy training. So if you look, for example, at this kind of first VLAs, the first question could be when you, let's say you start, I don't know, training OpenVLA or something on your robot, is how do I know if my model has converged when training? And so for autoregressive VLAs, we found a good rule of thumb is to wait until your action token accuracy reaches around 95%. So one thing to note here is that this action token accuracy is computed on teacher forcing and does not represent like the actual performance in real-world rollouts. But basically, like before it reaches 95%, you probably should not do any real-world rollouts because they won't be very good. So this measures like if we picked kind of the exact action bin correctly in this like discretized approach. But then you typically also will want to track, let's say, the L1 and L2 action errors, which measure how far of the predicted continuous, so how far the predicted continuous actions are from the ground truth. So this means like once you have detokenized your action tokens and unnormalized them back to continuous values, you can compare them with your ground truth actions and see how well you're doing. Another design choice one has to make when training generalist policies is how to batch heterogeneous data. This will be maybe less relevant for you because I assume you all will mostly be like fine-tuning on like your one robot. But when you do pre-training, this is kind of a more relevant, like with more different embodiment sources, this becomes a more relevant question. Because you might have, as I said before, let's say one embodiment with a single third-person camera observation input, and another one where, for example, you add 2 wrist cameras, so for a total of 3. And now, therefore, you can't just simply stack these into a batch. So the easiest way to handle this heterogeneity is, of course, that you can pad to the longest number of the observation inputs and mask the attention appropriately. And this is, for example, what we did for Octo and Crossformer. And so this is very easy to implement, right? It's probably like the first thing one can start with. However, you also need to understand the trade-offs you're making here if you have very heterogeneous observations. Because like now this can result in half your batch being full of zeros, right? So like you will be wasting like a lot of flops because like if you're padding all the time, then like, yeah, it's a lot of zeros that you're pushing through your GPU. Another different way how you could implement this in your data loading pipeline is to use sequence packing, which is kind of a technique specifically tailored to handle variable length inputs with transformers. So the key idea is that instead of padding and waste this compute on zeros, you concatenate everything into a single long vector so that you maximize your GPU throughput. And so now here, every sample contributes exactly the tokens that it actually has. And in order to keep track of where each sample in this long vector starts and ends, you will have to maintain like kind of like this cumulative sequence length like variable. The trade-off that you're making when you apply when you use the sequence packing approach is kind of implementation complexity. So you'll need block diagonal attention masks so that tokens from different samples don't attend to each other. And also you will need to reset your positional encodings at each sample boundary, which I visualize here, these kind of two concrete implementation challenges I just mentioned. So you have to be very careful on which tokens are allowed to attend to which tokens. So like the tokens in each sample should only attend to their own tokens, right? And then like be careful to reset your positional encodings at every sample boundary so you don't kind of keep growing the length of this. Now also let's talk about a practical but often overlooked topic. How do you actually load data during training? Because this matters actually more than you might think. So there are kind of two main strategies. On the left, you can see sequential reads with a shuffle buffer. This is what, like for example, we use for Octo or OpenVLA also uses. So you stream data sequentially from shards into a buffer, and then you sample a batch from there. And kind of the key insight here is that if your shuffle buffer is too small, your batches might become correlated as the degree of freedom, as the degree of randomness is directly proportional to the size of your shuffle buffer. And so this is, for example, something we learned the hard way when we started training Octo. So in the beginning, we had a shuffle buffer of only 20,000 samples. And combined with trajectory level interleaving, this resulted in really poor like generalization performance. And so we solved this by shuffling and interleaving from different trajectories. By shuffling and interleaving frames from different trajectories before decoding the images. And this allowed us to grow our shuffle buffer up to 500,000 samples. And this was kind of like actually made a big impact in the performance of the model. So nothing else changed. It was same like data mixture and everything. But this was quite important. And on the right, you see like you could also implement a data loading solution based on true random reads, where you maintain a flat index over your data set and perform like random seeks to build each batch. And this will give you more exact unbiased randomness, but here having like fast I/O will be very important, because you can't typically like load all like your data set into memory, so basically there's kind of this trade-off, right? And there are solutions that try to combine best of both worlds. You can also do kind of chunked random reads instead of like loading just like images or something. Just like data loading, once you start doing pre-training for kind of heterogeneous large data sets, becomes really also like key, like a key architectural choice that will affect also the performance of your policy, like via, for example, randomness and so forth. Another practical question that comes up when you're training generalist robot policies is how do you handle the fact that different robots have different action spaces? Right, so maybe like one data set with one embodiment has like 7 degrees of freedom arm, and in the next data set you have like bimanual with 14 degrees of freedom. And so there are kind of like two different approaches that are more or less popular. One on the left is kind of the cross-former style approach, where you have a shared transformer backbone that processes the observations and then routes this to separate embodiment-specific action heads, which with the benefit that you can easily have variable length outputs to accommodate for the different control frequencies. But of course, the downside is that if you want to add a new embodiment, now you will need to add a new head and fine-tune this probably. And on the right, you can see the kind of more Pi0 style approach, where you still have a shared transformer backbone, but now this is followed by a single action expert that outputs into a kind of unified padded action space. And so here, what you do is you will typically pick the maximum action dimension across all your embodiments and have every robot action 0 pad to fit that. And so this is kind of more simple, much more simple architecturally. Here, like maybe like one caveat would be that you will typically predict a single, like a fixed length action chunk for all embodiments, regardless of their control frequency. Maybe I have a question for you now. How do you think that the VLA for both of these options will know then the model which embodiment it should produce actions for at test time? So maybe you can take 20 seconds to discuss with your neighbor. So the question is, how does the model know at test time, like if it should produce actions, let's say, for a 7 degrees of freedom arm or a 14 degrees of freedom arm? And we have these two models with one model has embodiment-specific heads, and the other one is a single action expert with this padding, where all embodiments get predicted. So the question is, like, at test time, you have one model, and now you need to do inference, like how does it work? Like, what do you do?
Predict all of them, take the indices corresponding to the 7 actions.
Okay, so let's start with the cross-former. How does it work for the multiple heads?
The action
like, does the model infer like which head you are controlling, or do you need to tell and specify it to the model? Yeah.
I guess for the fourth.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good guess. So it's kind of a mixture of all your responses. So for the cross-former style approach, this is explicitly handled by the user, right? So like you will specify which head to use as part of your prompt or configuration. So you're kind of telling it like, oh, use the bimanual head or use the quadruped head and so forth, right? So the routing is hard-coded by the user. In the Pi0 style, like single action expert approach, there is typically no explicit head selection. And so the model has to infer the embodiment implicitly from the observations itself, right? And so this is like the camera views, right? So different types of camera views give some information on like which embodiment this might be. Also, the proprioceptive is also an input to the action head. So this will also give a very, very strong hint on like what embodiment it should produce actions for. And often also the language instructions too, actually, right? Because like you cannot do the same tasks with all embodiments, right? Like, yeah, if you tell like, I don't know, like a Roomba, like cut the sushi, like, you know, it's probably not going to work, right? So all these together give like a strong hint to the model on like what embodiment it should be controlling. And so, yeah, like the backbone should learn how to pick up on these cues and then route the information accordingly through the action expert. All right. So to close off the kind of this VLA part, I want to present some of the high-level ideas on how a lot of the current state-of-the-art VLAs are being trained, mostly based on the Pi05 and the knowledge insulation papers. There are like, of course, like some follow-ups, and I don't want to kind of explain everything, since like I think later Kwan will also share more about the latest model. But I would say this is kind of like a pretty solid recipe that nowadays a lot of like different labs have adopted or found success in replicating. And so first here, the VLM backbone is trained with next token prediction on a mixture of fast tokenized robot actions and web data. So co-training on web data helps to preserve kind of the capabilities of the VLM backbone and like avoids like catastrophic forgetting. And the fast tokens are good for representation learning too. And we already covered a few lectures ago how fast tokenization works, if you remember. And then in the second part is the action expert, which is trained with like a flow matching head, right? This is like this single action expert that will predict like all the different embodiments. So now you produce this continuous actions with the flow matching head. And besides not attending to the fast tokens, the action expert also implements a stop gradient operation. So this means that the action expert reads from the VLM backbone but can't update it, insulating it in order to preserve its VLM kind of like semantic capabilities. And this also helps like convergence, like fast training, and so forth. And you can find more details on the knowledge installation paper from Danny Dries on the bottom right. All right, so far we have talked about data and the modeling side of generalist robot policies. Last but not least, we'll also need to talk a little bit about evaluations, because as I said before, this now it's getting very, very expensive, right? And has any one of you already done any rollouts with your SO101? I don't know. Yes? Yeah? Did you like it? Yeah? Did it work?
Yeah, this morning the last one.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So good. So now when you keep doing this for a month, maybe like when I ask you in a month, you'll be like, oh, I can't see this robot anymore. It's like so expensive, like so tiring to do like rollouts with it. Because like there are like several things that make it difficult, right? So for example, if you have like a third-person camera mounted to your robot, and you train, like you collect some data, train your policy on it, and then someone goes and bumps into the camera, and now your camera is in a different like pose or position. Maybe like you didn't calibrate, like, I don't know, like, you know, it will be like out of distribution, like it doesn't work anymore. Maybe you have to like collect new data, fine tune, I don't know. Then also hardware failures. I think I saw some people already had hardware failures. How many people had hardware failures? Oh my God. All right, lots of hardware failures. So that's another thing, like maybe you collect some data, right? And let's say your policy has proprioceptive input, right? And now you have to do some surgery to save your robot. You know, you put like new motors or something, and now like your proprioception will have different readings than the data that you collected and trained your policy on, right? So there are like a lot of things that, you know, could go wrong. Like I'm sure they will be fantastic, and you will all enjoy it doing evals. But yeah, and in general, it also like takes a long time to do evals, right? Like you know, it's like low frequency control. It's not very fast. It takes like a long time. You see, like move it, and like oh, okay, moves another centimeter, and you know, like you wait there for 2 minutes to see like if it grasps something or not. So it just takes a long time. And so one way around this is to use simulation, because simulation makes research more accessible to people who might not have your same robot setup on one hand, and also it makes it a bit more reproducible, because now you don't have to like, I don't know, you know, this risk of like bumping into cameras or your proprioception to have different readings and so forth. And this is why during the development of Octo, we started a parallel project, which we coined Simpler. This was a collaboration actually with both Quan and also Ted Xiao, who also gave a guest lecture a few weeks ago. So they were both at Google at the time. And so in this project, we try to leverage sim evals for policies trained exclusively on real-world data. And so the hope here is really that if we can find a way to evaluate our real-world policies in simulation in a way that informs us about how they would perform in the real world, then we can just like, you know, sit back and enjoy life and while we run a large number of evals in simulation. And okay, so I will, on a very high level, explain how the idea of this works. So the success rates in Simpler are correlated between simulation and real world, so that's great. And this holds for different models, some from Google, some also the Octo. And importantly, this also holds for different distribution shifts, like textures, different camera poses, and distractors. So how does it work? So the first step is that you need to mitigate the control gap between the simulated and the real-world environments in order to ensure that the policy's actions executed in simulation will yield the same result compared to the real robot's end effector when observed, when executed on the real world. And so in order to do this, like you can do this by doing a system identification procedure on a small number of samples collected from the real world, right? So basically, this means like in a nutshell, your low-level controller in the real world and in the simulation should produce like the same outputs, more or less. And now the second step is to minimize the visual distribution shift by trying to match the simulated visuals to those of the real world. Here we did a very simple procedure. This is not like super realistic, like NVIDIA, Isaac Lab kind of style. Here we did green screening as a first step to try to minimize this visual distribution shift. So this means we segmented out interactive simulated assets and overlaid them into real-world backgrounds. And then the second one is texture matching, where we projected textures from real-world objects into simulation assets. Like, for example, the Coke can. Like, we take the texture of like a real-world Coke can and overlay it on top of like the simulated Coke can. And so maybe one thing to notice how, like, what you get out of this is, so simpler gives you correlated performance. So it does not mean that. It does not mean that if in simulation you get 50% success rate on picking up the Coke can, that in the real world you will get also 55 success rate. So it's not absolute. It doesn't tell you anything about the absolute rollout or success rate performance of your robot in the real world. All it can do is give you pairwise comparison. So if policy A performs better than policy B in this simpler framework, this will also hold true in the real world. And the paper also has like kind of more explanations on how you can measure this with like ranking and so on. So I invite you to check it out. There is some follow-up work, cool work that tries to improve like correlations of such real-to-sim evaluation frameworks, such as Polaris, Robot Arena Infinity, or Robolab. And maybe there are some other that I'm not aware of. And so I think this is really interesting to enable like researchers and practitioners around the world to do like research on generalist robot policies. So it abstracts away to some degree the need of you having to have like all these different robot setups to try to see if your generalist robot policy is actually generalist. All right, so to conclude today's lecture, we talked about the 3 ingredients that we have covered in order to develop generalist robot policies. We have talked about how you can aggregate existing offline robot data and convert it into a common format that enables co-training on them. Then we have covered how you can train generalist policies and cross-embody generalist robot policies from scratch on this data, followed by how to leverage internet-scale priors like VLMs in order to train VLAs, or vision language action models. And finally, we have also shown one way the community is exploring for how to make evaluations of such generalist robot policies more scalable by leveraging correlated evaluations in simulation. And with this, thank you for your attention.